The Kurds are proud of their makeshift government, their race and their country. They've held sway in the mountains since 2000 BC. They've been invaded, conquered, forced to migrate, but have never submitted to outside rule for long. This exclusive film was taken this summer by a camera team who entered the Kurdish-occupied area of northern Iraq by the only route open through Persia. This is the road to Kurdistan, although officially Kurdistan doesn't exist. It's the name given to a mountainous area called after the Kurdish tribesmen who've lived there since biblical times. The Kurds live in peace with their other neighbors, but in Iraq, for the last 5 years, they've been pinning down 2/3 of the Iraqi army in a war of independence. The only outside help they've had is unofficial from Persia. This petrol dump near the Iraqi border is available to vehicles taking supplies into the rebels. Russia, seeking a way to the Middle East oil fields through Kurdistan, once supported the Kurds. But the shifting balance of power offered the Russians other and more useful toeholds in the area. So, for the past 5 years, the Kurds have been going it alone with the tacit support of their Persian friends. It's a 600-mile drive from the Persian capital Tehran to the ill-defined border with Kurdistan. The last 100 miles before the frontier are part of a military zone under constant patrol by the Persian army, but the Kurds come and go as they please as far as Karnam, the last Persian outpost before the frontier, to buy supplies. The Persian government turns a blind eye, partly to soothe its own Kurdish minority, partly because relations with Iraq are strained. More than once, Iraqi planes have carried the war across the frontier and strafed Persian villages. Beyond Karnam lies the border itself. The watchtower overlooks the no-man's land between Persia and Kurdish-held Iraq. But there was a careful show of indifference to the film unit going in. No questions were asked, and just inside no man's land, in full view of the Persian guards, a Kurdish jeep arrived to guarantee the camera's safe conduct to the battle zone. With the change of vehicles, a new guide. The local Kurdish commander had been alerted and had sent back a patrol to act as chauffeur and reception committee. Beyond the border, the road gets worse as it twists up into the hills. This is the home of the Kurdish freedom fighters. Their enemy, the Iraqi regulars, have their main garrison at Ruandus. That's about 30 miles from the Kurdish stronghold at Guerrilla, the first Kurdish refueling point. At Guerrilla, the wreckage of an Iraqi MiG fighter shot down by the Kurds in a raid on the town. Among the buildings destroyed during the air attacks at Guerrilla were the school and the mosque. The Kurds, though Western in language and character, still share the Islamic faith with their Arab enemies. For the past 6 years, Guerrilla has been on constant alert for the daily whine of Iraqi jets overhead. It's the main supply center for the Kurdish warriors, or Peshmergas as they call themselves. The name means those who are prepared to die, and hundreds of them have died for what they now call the liberated area of Kurdistan. Guerrilla is the only town where the Peshmergas can buy food, clothing and guns between battles. Ironically, they pay in Iraqi dinars, because although the Kurds claim all the trappings of a separate state, an army, a parliament and people's courts, they haven't got their own currency. During the fighting, Guerrilla and towns like it lived virtually by night, when they were free from Iraqi air raids. By night, the army-controlled administration kept the civil services going. The army courts met to settle civil disputes. The Kurds have a strict moral code. A bride found to have lost her virginity before marriage can be shot. In this nocturnal court, though, a less dramatic domestic issue is being decided. The woman is seeking a divorce on the grounds that her husband beats her. Here he is. The judge in the case is a Peshmerga who left his family and legal practice in Baghdad 3 years ago to join the freedom fighters. In this case, the woman's petition is unsuccessful. The judge refuses to believe her complaints and dismisses the case. The Kurds are proud of their makeshift government, their race and their country. They've held sway in the mountains since 2000 BC. And claim to be descendants of the Medes of the Old Testament. They've been invaded, conquered, forced to migrate, but have never submitted to outside rule for long. Their objection to being a minority race inside Iraq is that they stand to lose their autonomy, their language, and their pride. If they're to be part of Iraq, they demand full participation in the government and the army. For 8 years now, they've been fighting for it, and they're prepared to go on fighting if necessary. The Kurds are undisputed masters of the mountains, where the Iraqi tanks can't reach them. They're skilled guerrilla fighters. They can slip unseen amongst the rocks, and their outposts give them a bird's-eye view of any Iraqi troop movements in the valley below, and allow them to dominate the road. From lofty vantage points, the Kurds keep constant watch on enemy garrisons like Rwanda's. 30,000 Iraqi troops have been pinned down there by a handful of Peshmergas with heavy American mortars. Shells are too scarce to waste. The Kurdish aim is deadly accurate. Watch closely and you'll see another almost on target. In one pitched battle earlier this summer, the Kurds claimed to have routed 15,000 troops from Rwanda's and to have killed 1,000 men for the loss of only 50 on their side. But usually the Kurds prefer hit-and-run raids. Before the enemy can return the fire, the tribesmen are back under cover, snatching a meager meal of cheese, flat bread, goat's milk, thin soup and tea. Nightfall, but no time to rest. Another patrol faces some of the 25,000 men of the Kurdish force. On the ground, the Kurds have the advantage of geography, so the Iraqis concentrate even more strongly on surprise air attack. A frequent target, Hamilton's Bridge at Choman, named after the British engineer who built it. The Kurds, anticipating one air raid on the bridge, sent 3 Peshmergas up the mountain with Czech machine guns. None had ever fired this weapon before. The gunners, concealed on the hillside, saw what looked like a direct hit on the bridge from a British-built Hunter. It flew over at 400 feet, dodging the ineffective fire of tribesmen more used to simple muskets than machine guns with a kick. But after attacking the bridge for 3 days in a row, the Iraqi jets failed to destroy it. Hamilton's Bridge, built 30 years ago, stood firm despite its battle scars, and the highway which it carries over the Rwanda's river remained open to the Kurdish troops. The Hunter you've just seen apparently got away unscathed, but the Kurds do claim to have brought down planes with small arms fire. Any marksman skillful enough to do so gets a 20-pound bounty and a new gun. As evidence of one hit, the Kurds brought forward this auxiliary fuel tank, but the pilot could have ditched it to gain speed for a getaway. At first, they thought it was some strange sort of bomb, A check on its serial number showed it was part of a British Hunter jet supplied to Iraq less than 3 years ago. Other more positive evidence of a kill: the wreckage of an Aleutian 28 brought down by a 20mm machine gun in one of the last sorties of the war. The crew of 5 tried to bail out, but were killed when the plane hit a rocky ridge. Leading the Kurdish warriors in their fight is a man who spent 12 years in Russia after the war, but without becoming a communist. He's General Mullah Mustafa Barzani, who's 63, father of 8 sons. Until the peace talks, there was a price on his head of £300,000. General Barzani is never far away from the battlefront, and it's he who's taken the leading part in negotiations with the Baghdad government. In an interview, he talked about the war.
100,000 Peshmergas could continue the struggle if only we had enough arms. No Iraqi government can last if the struggle continues. We will accept aid from anyone. So far, we haven't attacked the oil installations because of our friendly feelings towards the Britons who control them. But if they don't help us, we will explode the installations.
Recruiting posters put the Iraqi government case that the Kurds are a minority group committing treason against a legally constituted government. They describe the Kurds as a threat to national unity. General Barzani says that over 12,000 Kurds have been killed in the last 5 years, 10,000 of them civilians. Wounded troops are taken to the forward hospital, where a queue of casualties are always waiting for treatment. In the cramped surgery, Dr. Abdul Hamkit deals single-handed with casualties, working mostly at night and snatching rest when he can in the day. The tradition amongst the Peshmergas is that the badly wounded shoot themselves rather than survive maimed. Drugs and medical supplies are scarce, and most arrive through the Red Cross or communist sources, since the Baghdad government cut the roads north. Life in the villages, despite the war, goes on much as it has for centuries. Most Kurds are small farmers. Their only contact with the 20th century, the hostile jets for which a watch is kept around the clock. The villagers are friendly and welcome all guests, except Iraqis and hunger. Since the war began, farming has been disrupted and crops ruined by napalm bombs. Wheat is scarce, tea, sugar and rice are luxuries for which have to be imported by way of Persia. And the tobacco exports, which paid for them, have been cut off. Today the factories are on the wrong side of the front line. But despite shortages, the Kurds display an almost British concern in keeping their pets well fed. Outside each village, a close watch is kept for the approach of troops or planes. The Kurds claim that over 270 Kurdish villages have suffered air attacks. The lookout on the rocky pinnacle has overtones of Kipling and the northwest frontier, but the Kurds are not, in fact, without modern aids to warfare. In a valley well hidden from patrolling planes lies the underground nerve center of the Kurdish High Command and a radio link with the battle areas. But more often than not, the Kurds depend on runners to carry important messages to headquarters. Barzani, a man of action himself, prefers to let the members of his high command handle the paper war. Among the 15 members of the High Command, Father Paul Baden, a 76-year-old Catholic priest working alongside Muslims in the interests of the small Christian community. Others include high-ranking army officers, engineers, and the secretary of the Kurdish Democratic Party. Together, they act virtually as a cabinet under Barzani's overall leadership. It's the High Command who handle all matters of administration, supply, and military strategy. It's they who give the Peshmergas their marching orders and make sure that they're properly trained and equipped. At the High Command's camp, about 40 Iraqi prisoners of war have been put to work. The Kurds claim to have taken about 800 prisoners in all, but many of them are sent back to the Iraqis, minus their arms and ammunition, because the Kurds can't afford the guards or the food to keep them. Those who do stay are allowed to broadcast messages to their families on Radio Free Kurdistan. 3 prisoners were asked if they'd been able to inform their families where they were. The first man said that he hadn't been able to contact them. The second said the same. The third, a Kurd who went over to the Iraqi side, said his family knew where he was. He bitterly regretted his treachery and would never repeat the mistake. He wanted to stay with the Kurds. But his 2 fellow prisoners, both Iraqi-born, wanted nothing more than to get home to their families. They were afraid that their families were very unlikely to have heard the broadcasts that they were allowed to make, and would assume that they'd been killed in the fighting. One of the more hazardous jobs in the war effort is done by the Kurdish Ordnance Corps. They collect unexploded shells left over from Iraqi attacks and saw them up. The TNT inside is poured out to be used again against the Iraqis. The TNT is collected into sacks and taken to the ammunition factory, a kind of thieves' kitchen inside a mountain cave. Inside, welding equipment fashions grenades and mines out of any material that comes to hand. Grenades may be made out of sawn-off lengths of metal piping and a mine sealed by a pottery saucer. They're painted green, a lucky color, and a jubilant poster shows how they get the Iraqis on the run. Near the armaments factory is the Army's Training and Administrative Office. Most Kurds don't take kindly to office work or to becoming bureaucrats. They're born to the freedom of the mountains and the rule of the gun, and they lavish extraordinary care on their rifles. Kurds pride themselves on being crack marksmen. They shoot for fun as well as in anger. The variety of their guns would grace an armaments museum. Most of them are captured from the Iraqis, but many have come into their hands through private deals in Europe on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Tires, scarce and essential, are also carefully tended. The Peshmergas have to eat when and where they can, and they live mainly off the land. Every farmer gives 10% of his harvest to the troops, and Kurds outside Iraq donate 10% of their income to the cause. Prisoners are given the same food as the army. The Kurdish army is limited to 25,000 because that's all they have arms for. Only a favored few also can be provided with horses. The Peshmergas know every inch of their countryside by night or day. Most need little training, though some of them have been trained in Russia or with the Iraqi army. Kurds put the number of Iraqi defectors who have joined them at over 750 last year alone. By and large, the outside world has shown little interest in helping the Kurds in their remote war. To help spread knowledge and encourage support, the Kurds have set up a radio station in a big cave, Radio Free Kurdistan. Since this film was taken, it's been hit by Iraqi hunter jets. The station transmits on the shortwave band twice each day. Programs last 15 minutes and go out at peak Iraqi listening hours. The station's technical equipment is mostly American and reasonably up to date. The range of the station is about 500 miles and covers Baghdad. Getting spare parts if anything goes wrong is a major problem, especially if the generators fail. The chief editor and master scriptwriter has a hut to himself in which he prepares the patriotic appeals which are Radio Free Kurdistan's staple diet. His message is put over with passion by the station announcer. This is the voice of Kurdistan, the voice of the red blood which is shed on the mountains. The voice which tells the enemy clearly, we seek freedom or death. The voice before which the enemy cower. Almost as soon as programs start, Baghdad tries to drown the announcer by playing on the same wavelength a top Arab pop song. But the message gets through to the faithful just the same. Now that the war, for the moment at any rate, is over, Radio Free Kurdistan will have to adopt a new style. Aggression will have to change to words of peace and reconciliation. The same applies to the Kurds' other propaganda organ. From a mountain hut, they publish their monthly Kurdistan News. It's printed in Arabic and translated to English and French for outside consumption. It makes some startling claims for Kurdish successes. In 1965 alone, 8,000 Iraqis killed, 9 planes shot down, and 300 vehicles destroyed. But no figures for Kurdish losses ever find their way from the antiquated German printing press. Last month's issue gave what the Kurds claimed to be Iraq's final plans for exterminating Kurdish forces. This month's edition will no doubt reflect Barzani's attitude towards peace with Iraq. He's endorsed Baghdad's 12 peace points. These go some way to meeting Kurdish demands, but only in general terms. And there's one big stumbling block. Until his demands have been met, Barzani refuses to give up his illegal private army. Peace talks are going on at Ruanduz. If they fail, the Kurds may soon be listening again to the bellicose verses of their poet laureate.
نار ملکنی شیای کرد و دیاری نابیشاوی دمد دشتین اگر بردم بجاوی نخورمای و نوشترخانه شیوم ولاتم کردواری و کردنیوم اگر نام ناسی بروانه لمیجو بزانه و فیر به کرد چونه و چلون بو لپیش تو گزنفون روی کرده خاکم وکو دالاش اسوراب و کلاکم گلک تیمور و سنگیز و هلاکو لدشتم تیپرین وگوشتری تو گلک پیخواسی بیدر پی رشورود بنانم سردمه جی چاوی فشکود